Stream started. Let's go ahead and pull that up. That's where we ended last time. And then I'll bring up this, that, mute that. Okay. Make sure that the audio is good. Great. Okay. So, once again, as a reminder for everybody, especially my online students, because there's a lot of them, paper is due a week from Wednesday. So, next Wednesday, March the 5th. Make sure real quick, because I don't have a calendar in front of me. Yes. March 5th is the first paper. And for the 60 or so online students, please attach that as a Word document or a PDF document or some way that I can get to very easily. Don't just send it to me via Google Docs, because I don't have access to that through Francis Marion. They don't like that. It'll get caught by the anti-spam, anti-virus, whatever, and I won't ever see it. So don't do that. Don't send me a link either, because if I have to go through and get permission, I'm just going to set that to the side and go grading the other 59 papers I have to grade. And if you ever even get around to me, because a lot of students don't even get around to sending the thing, it's not going to get graded, and you're going to get a 0. So make sure I can open it right away. For those of you in here, the lot of you that are in here, I would prefer that you print it out and bring it in. If you don't have a printer at home, which I get, my printer at home hasn't worked for probably as long as many of you have been alive. There's let's see, which way are we facing? Media Center down the hall. You can print out there. If you're not able to print it out, just send it like I just said. Attach it as a document of some sort to an email. I'm talking without breathing. To an email, and send it to me through email, riley.holt@fmarion.edu. Any questions before we start? All good? Okay. I'm going to tell you all this again on Wednesday and also next Monday. It's like, by the way, guys, next class, you got to get your paper done. So, yeah, I like to warn everybody so it doesn't just suddenly happen. Hey, by the way, you got a paper due. But I'm still going to get emails like Tuesday night. Wait, we have a paper due? What's it on? Yeah. Which, by the way, the topic is on Blackboard. It says paper 1 topic, which actually I think the paper 1 topic has both of the topics on there. I haven't changed the name on the file, which I should. Yeah, by the way. Okay. So this is where we ended. The waves of immigration causing the composition of the U.S. to change. The percentages of the various cities, in large part, being, well, really mostly immigrants and their children. And how many immigrants would return home once they had achieved some level of economic success, whereas others would not, due to them coming to America to escape political or religious persecution, because, well, obviously you're not going to go back home if you're going to be murdered. So there again, 1910, this is about the middle of what we're talking about, where the majority of the immigrants came from. Again, lots of Germans. And then again, this weird little like niche here where it's just suddenly we've got a little Scandinavia going on. and it's still just heavily Scandinavian up there. And that's just the percentages that we had in the book, but more specific, again, just a slide I just blatantly stole offline. And another map here of the migration patterns. I've got some images. I think this is the train car, Ellis Island, some of the housing, which we'll get into greater detail a little bit later, and the streets. Okay. So, speaking of Ellis Island, when immigrants showed up to America, they were processed wherever it was they arrived. Again, largely Ellis Island, which is the island off the coast of New York City, or if they arrived in, say, Florida, usually Miami, the government would take their names, where they came from. A lot of the times, I meant to mention this in my last class, a lot of the times if the government agent couldn't pronounce or attempt to spell their last name, they would just put their last name down as where they came from. So, for example, once again, if you were to watch, say, The Godfather, which I would suggest everyone watching The Godfather, the Corleone family, which is the main, I don't know if I'd say protagonist, but they're like the main family you follow throughout the three movies. That's not their last name. That's the region that they came from in Sicily. But the immigration officer in Ellis Island couldn't pronounce their last name, so he just wrote Corleone on their immigration slip. So that is now officially their last name in America. And anyway, once they arrived in the country, and they were processed, they were let loose and told, good luck. There was no sort of government assistance, no kind of like, hey, here's a place to go to figure out where to get a job or where to live. It's just like, all right, well, you don't understand English and you don't have any job experience. Well, good luck. Don't die in a gutter. Yeah. So places like New York, Boston, Chicago, there were ghettos that cropped up. A ghetto is by definition a neighborhood of the same, which is to say, ethnic, racial, or class group. The meaning has changed somewhat over time. But this will be used by immigrants to ease their transition into this new country. Say the Italians would show up and they would go into Italian ghettos and be with people from, Italy. And oftentimes not even just Italy, but their region of Italy. Because Italy, around this time had just unified. And even today is still pretty sectional. Northern Italians and Southern Italians are very different from one another. And even within those regions, there's places that are pretty independent from one another. So they would look out for each other and form their own little communities. So within the ghettos, mutual aid societies formed. And this is something that we will talk about a fair bit. They would provide social welfare, insurance payments, and funeral rights. An example for one of these, the founder of one Jewish association explained that a man died in a factory and was left in an unmarked grave. That's not exactly how you treat a human being. His neighbors learned about it, dug him up, and started their organization with the cemetery because, well, again, just like digging a hole and throwing in a body um, isn't really treating a person's body well. So the only way they could give him a proper burial was by creating their own little mutual aid society to properly take care of somebody after they die. Chinese in San Francisco's Chinatown has similar organizations. They are members with fine jobs, fight anti-Chinese discrimination, sponsor cultural festivals. The Japanese on the West Coast had Kinjinkai, social activities, helping first-generation immigrants find jobs and housing. And then we go down to Florida. Spaniards, Cubans, Afro-Cubans, and Italians had a bunch of competing mutual aid societies. We had El Centro Español, El Centro Austriano had a large, expensive theater. El Circulo Cubano had a pharmacy, a theater, and a ballroom. And La Union Marti Macio, which had a baseball team for Latin immigrants. So we go from, and I like this transition. We go from like this dude dies in a factory and is just like dumped in a hole, and his neighbors learn about it and they're like, okay, we got to do something about this. This is terrible. To there's these multiple mutual aid societies that are like doing so well. They're building theaters and pharmacies and ballrooms and like baseball teams to compete with each other to try to get like more members because they're doing well. And that to me is pretty cool because like this is usually going to be what we're going to be looking at is like things are not great, but it's nice to see that sometimes they were doing all right. And this competition between these mutual aid societies is healthy because again that means they're doing well, and also having baseball teams, and we'll actually get to that a little bit more in the next slide, is important for a couple of reasons. One, it's both competitive and cooperative sports. It's people you're working together with the team, you're making friends, you're playing against the other team, you've got like this friendly rivalry, you've got sportsmanship. But what it's also doing is just pulling kids off the street. Because a lot of these immigrants are coming over, they're young men, they're kids, and they're having a hard time finding jobs. And if you're not finding a job, you're not making money. And if you're not making money, you're probably hungry and maybe not even got anywhere to live. And when you're getting desperate, you're likely to turn to crime to make ends meet. But if you've got these mutual aid societies looking out for you and giving you something to do, then it's keeping you away from crime. So not only were they like taking care of people and like giving them just like basic human dignity, they're also keeping them out of trouble. So like these mutual aid societies were really, really good. Besides just like the obvious of having things to help people, there was also like less obvious benefits. Like, oh, it's a baseball team. It's like, okay, cool. It gives them something to do. It's like, well, giving them something to do has a lot more benefits than just keeping them from being bored. To go back to some of the bad stuff, the housing wasn't great. Most of the time it was just like these shacks. We'll actually look at this image again a little bit later when we talk about like some of the more dangerous neighborhoods. That said, like these rough-looking guys out here, while if you were just like some person walking down the street, or especially if you were, say, an authority figure, these guys might be dangerous to you. They're going to be looking out for the people living in this neighborhood. They're essentially the guards. This one, I mean, this one feels like a prospector living out in the West. Barely even looks like a house. It looks like a, well, again, a prospector's hut. So here again, you've got like the storefronts here, and then right across the road is the shacks with people just trying to survive. Yeah, here's this one. These boys here. It's a cold winter's day in, I'm pretty sure, New York, and they've got their bare feet over this grate, which I'm pretty sure opens to the sewer. And a lot of times in New York, the sewer is going to be warmer than the outside air. That's why a lot of times you'll see in movies and stuff like steam coming out of the vents in the sewers. So they're trying to keep their feet from freezing. Yeah, not a great place to be. On more positive notes, here's a Union A Fraternité. I can't pronounce that. It's an Italian brotherhood mutual aid society type thing. As you can tell by how they're dressed, they're doing pretty well. Hebrew Shelter and Immigrant Aid Society. So for Jewish immigrants coming in. Another Italian place, Circolo Stabile, I think. Society for Protection of Italian Immigrants. Here is a Kinjinkai, so West Coast, Japanese immigrants. Lots of like cultural festivals, and they're still around. Here are some descendants of Japanese immigrants, including the still living George Takei. We will talk more about him towards the end of the semester when we talk about the Japanese internment camps during World War II, because he was a child when that happened. He was there when the United States government decided that people that look Japanese need to go to concentration camps, including the children, because they might be spies. Anyway, so besides the mutual aid societies, we also had churches and synagogues. So obviously religious and social activities. And as we talked about last time, lots of Catholics and Jews came to America over that time period between like 1860 and 1900. So Catholic churches specifically more than tripled from 3,000 to 10,000 between 1865 and 1900. And that was where you wanted to go to celebrate important events, births, baptisms, weddings, and deaths, than just like going up to the city hall and like signing a piece of paper. Yeah, again, like I was raised Methodist, so we're like Catholic adjacent. Well, technically we're Anglican adjacent, which is itself Catholic adjacent, so we're like 2 degrees separate. But again, if you're not familiar with Catholicism, watch The Godfather, because they have like I think it was the christening of like one of Michael Corleone's children, and it was like this whole thing, like half the freaking city was there, and they used that as cover for like a big thing that I won't spoil if you haven't seen this movie that's like 70 years old. But that's like these, especially with Catholics, they're big things. When children are born, it's a big thing. When there's a baptism, it's a big thing. When there's a wedding, my God, it's a big thing. And when there's a death, it's called a wake, and it lasts a week. Yeah, it's a whole thing. Like, it's a lot. Um, Churches also offer food and clothing. They also had sports teams, which again helps to get kids off the street, um, helps to keep them out of crime. Um, but also, the immigrants coming over from Europe actually changed how religions were celebrated in the U.S. Um, and again, my brief time in Europe, I was in Ireland for like 4 months, um, which again, when I was there, I didn't know a whole lot about Catholicism, but based on what I learned there, and then coming back here and spending my time like 2 years in Rhode Island and learning like how Catholicism is practiced here, uh, yeah, there's like specific patron saints and protectresses and like very specific. I wouldn't say deities. That's not quite right, but like, well, patron saints and stuff that are practiced in specific countries and even like in specific regions in specific countries that aren't recognized by the rest of the Catholic Church. So American Catholics saw this as basically pagan. Yeah, it's a whole thing. Again, the Catholic Church is really big and complicated. Which, considering like there is no Protestant church, it's just a bunch of different little denominations. So if you pretended it was one big thing, it would be big and complicated too, considering how different the denominations are from one another. So it also shifted with Judaism. The German Jews that had shown up earlier in America had integrated to some degree, and actually had founded Reform Judaism. Which again, I say this every year, and every I have 2 in-person classes, and I say this every time. It's so weird that when you talk about Reform Judaism, you have to say with my mouth, it was founded in Cincinnati, Ohio. Like what? Cincinnati, Ohio? Like our Ohio? Okay. Yeah, Reform Judaism was founded in Cincinnati, Ohio. Okay, sure, why not? Um, I don't have any reason to give Ohio a hard time, but I just feel like it. So yeah, they relaxed the standards of worship. So the strict adherence to kosher diet was relaxed. Prayers could be said in English, etc. So the Eastern European Jews that came from like Russia especially, but Poland and other places, they still followed the Orthodox ways. They went to shul, which is like Hebrew for synagogue. Maintained the kosher diet, prayed in Hebrew. It was like a culture shock, which even in the rest of Europe, in like Germany, when the Eastern European Jews were pushed westward by the various pogroms in Russia, which, if you're not familiar, a pogrom is just a persecution of Jews, because we have a word for it. It's happened so often in history. There was a region in Western Russia that was called the Jewish Pale, and they were supposed to be allowed to live there and just left alone. And then Russia decided that they didn't want to do that anymore and just went in and killed a bunch of them. Anyway, the Jews moved out of Russia and into like the rest of Europe, and the Jews in the rest of Europe were like, we don't know who you people are. You're so different from us, despite us being like the same religion, because the Jews in Europe had like assimilated into Europe, while those in like Eastern Europe had been isolated and maintained like the old ways, and it was like someone from 300 years ago had just shown up at your doorstep, and that's what was happening here essentially. So yeah, it was a culture shock for everybody. If you've never been to a Catholic cathedral. They're really fantastic. They're really, really pretty. Again, my first time at a Catholic cathedral was in Ireland. Um, there's not a lot of them around down here. We have, our little Protestant churches. Speaking of which, here's a little Protestant church. They're not necessarily that small, but we tend to be a bit smaller with our Protestant churches. Speaking of, this is one of my favorite pictures. So, this is a regiment in the Civil War. I believe this is the Union side. This is an Irish regiment. And it's Sunday. And a good Catholic Irishman needs to have Mass on Sunday. So they're sat around. They've constructed this altar. You can kind of see here they've got like a cross and a bunch of like pictures of Mary and whatnot up here on this table. And they've erected the cross here, and it's got a covering for the priest to stand under. And they're having Mass because they're a bunch of good Catholics. Yeah, that's just how it is. Or how it was, I suppose. Probably more today. It's you've got the chaplain who he's for everybody. That said, Catholicism, the rise of Catholicism, I should say, wasn't well appreciated among the Protestant majority here in the U.S. So there was a lot of backlash, which is to say many of the new cathedrals being built were burned down. And here we have some the Jewish boy being confirmed. They've got, oh yeah, and here is Jews from Eastern Europe, which again is like looking 100 years in the past. They had been living much like we'd seen at the beginning of the chapter, where people have been living basically the same life for the last few centuries. And it's like they just stepped out of a time bubble. All right, speaking of, and we've kind of mentioned this, well, I have mentioned this twice before, crime. But first, let's say literacy. Yeah, immigrants who don't speak English can't read English. It makes sense. So a lot of foreign language newspapers started to spread to inform the immigrants of what was going on. Not only about local events and national events, but also stuff going on back home. So they could maintain their ties to the old country and also know what was going on for social and cultural events in the area, so they could know if there was going to be like a picnic or a festival or like some kind of job fair, that sort of thing. And once again, because there were a lot of Germans, the German language tabloids were the most common. Because if you've got a lot of people speaking German, you might as well print a lot of newspapers in German. So we had dailies like the New York Staatszeitung, the St. Louis Anzeigen des Westens, Cincinnati Wurzblatt, which, by the way, I meant to mention this in my last class too. You might recognize this from like Volkswagen. Volks is like the people. So that's what that means. And then the Wisconsin Banner, I don't know. I'm not sure why, I don't know why that's the thing. And as I mentioned, with poor, unskilled communities, people unable to find jobs, people being dismissed from jobs because they're immigrants, you get desperate and then you get crime. That's just what happens. Young men join gangs. They're often based on ethnic heritage, and they fight one another for turf, oftentimes within their own, like, immigrant group. So, like, as I mentioned, the Italians um, would oftentimes be split among their own regional rivalries. Again, I'm going to go back to The Godfather because it was a really good movie. um, the other families that the Corleones are fighting are other Italian families. Like, they're not. There's like one crooked cop they deal with, but for the most part, they're fighting other Italian families. Um, so for the adults, they had underworld organizations tied to international syndicates like the Mafia, as I mentioned, trafficking and prostitution, gambling, robbery, and murder. Tongs, which were secret organizations that were formed by the Chinese in New York and San Francisco. Initially, they were mutual aid societies, but they soon controlled the opium trade, gambling and prostitution in their communities. And the Tongs, well, we'll get to that in a minute. They could be a special kind of violent. All right. So some tabloids, the Scranton Rotenblatt. The W's and V's, the pronunciation is switched, by the way. I can't quite tell what that first letter is. Vangelis, Cincinnati. There's the Volksblatt. This is something in French for New Orleans. Abil de la Nouvelle Orleans. And the Daily Jewish Courier, which I can't even pretend to know how to pronounce. I can't read Hebrew. Like, I can stumble over German and like make a fool of myself for fun, but I can't do Hebrew. Also, when we talk about the mafia, it's like, oh, gang violence and robberies and all that. This is what the mafia usually did. They would muscle in on union jobs. They would intimidate people and basically cheat the payroll. And they'd have a bunch of dudes standing around doing nothing while they took like a month to build the sidewalk, basically. So to have all their guys on the payroll making money on some kind of civic works job. I mean, they get it built eventually, but they'd be basically illegally skimming money out of the coffers. And that's typically what the mafia did. They did a lot of like that sort of thing, white collar crime. I mean, in gambling, the gambling stuff, again, usually wasn't like they break your legs, which they would, but a lot of that was, they were part of facilitating that. And they'd also send guys down to the docks, find immigrants who had just gotten off the boat, find someone that looked strong, maybe couldn't speak much English, say, hey, you want a job, get them in as some low-level enforcer. They don't really know what they're getting into. They make some decent money. They don't ask questions. It's all right until it's not. Here's another just like basic street scene. Again, see Godfather, this is a pretty common scene. Just you've got carts and people and stuff moving around. Here's the guy that clearly got in a fight before he got his mugshot. crap kicked out of him. And here we have the Tongs checking the latest news there on the wall. They didn't try to hide who they were. I mean, they're all dressed in pretty much a uniform, essentially, with the top knots and everything. Or the braid, rather, not a top knot. And when it came to the Tongs, if they wanted to send a message, they didn't use a gun. They'd hit you with basically cleavers. They'd cut you up and let you bleed out. And then whoever found you, it looked like you'd been to a butcher shop. So, yeah. They had an old-fashioned way of doing things. Not that the Mafia was, like, clean about it, because, you know, they've got the old cement shoes thing where, you know, you put your feet in cement and let it harden, and they just throw you in the river. Not a great way to go. All right. Now, let's talk about something that is definitely 100% a thing in the past that has nothing to do with the modern day. Hostility towards recent immigrants. So, the inscription on the plaque at the base of the Statue of Liberty that welcomed the tired, poor, huddled masses, the immigrants whose families had arrived before 1860 saw the new immigrants as a necessary evil or a menace. By the way, the Statue of Liberty itself was 10 years behind schedule. It was meant to arrive in 1876 as a present from France for our 100th anniversary. And when it did arrive, it sat in the harbor, or not in the harbor, like in the warehouse district of New York for, I want to say, about a year, while New York held like a donation drive to get the base built for it. It was something of a disaster. Like, you look at it today, it's like, oh yeah, it's the Statue of Liberty, and it's, you know, this great beacon of hope, and yeah, it was a disaster. They got it built, and it got here, and we got the thing, but it took a minute. Also, for those of you that don't know, I think most people know, but if you don't know, it wasn't always green. It's made out of copper. It was a shiny, shiny bronze when it was first built. But it's out there in the sea air, and copper oxidizes, and it turns green. If you've ever had a penny that's been like left out in the wind and the rain and the sun for a while, it turns green. It gets gross. Yeah, that's what happens to copper when it's been treated poorly. So yeah, just FYI. So, needless to say, industrialists were fine with immigrants because, well, cheap labor. The workers didn't like them because they were a threat to their jobs. They would, well, work for less, drive down wages. And a small number of immigrants did not come to share in its bounty. Some of them were anti-capitalist. They wanted to reorganize society and tear down the government. We had seen some of that last chapter with the anarchists. And while most immigrants were not radicals, most of the radicals were immigrants. And so it was very easy for their opponents to just paint all immigrants as radicals. Which, again, surely isn't something that unscrupulous people do in the modern day. Also, fresh racism. Okay. 1790, which, you know, is well before this, but just to go back for a minute, Congress passed a statute that limited citizenship to whites, which left out Native Americans and any freed blacks. Which, again, that totally, man. There are even debates on whether Catholics and Jews could be considered white, as these new ethnic groups came from Eastern Europe, where white was more about ethnicity and religion than skin tone. Because, especially, the ethnic term for white is Caucasian, right? And there's a region in Eastern Europe, or there's a mountain range in Eastern Europe called the Caucasus Mountains, and a region of land beyond the Caucasus Mountains called Transcaucasia, where the white people are from. But because they're not the right religion or the right ethnic group, they're not considered white enough to be American. So it's not really about skin tone, it's about ethnicity and religion. So this idea of racial inferiority used the so-called science of the day, and boy, we'll get into that, to categorize people claiming they were further down the evolutionary scale, and we'll get more into that as we get into imperialism. But yeah, more on that in a minute. So, here's the Statue of Liberty just sort of hanging out in the warehouse district, just standing on the docks with the scaffold around it, because there's nothing, there's no base. Here's a really horrendous anti-Semitic thing: the new transatlantic Hebrew line for the exclusive use of, quote, the persecuted. Because, hundreds of years, actually, no, let me take that back. A few thousand years of literal pogroms, which again is a word specifically used for the persecution of Jews, is a word we have. Yeah, no, that's not real. So we've got a whole lot of really, really racist caricatures of Jews, even the ship, which is messed up. The fish, okay, the bird, like, okay, yeah. Yep. Then there's this one, the great fear of the period: the United States may be swallowed by foreigners. The map down here is weird. It's from the north looking south. So you've got, up here is Canada, down there is you've got Texas and the Gulf of Mexico. So over here is the east, and over there is the west. So you've got, over here is the Irish, and over there is the Chinese, and they're eating Uncle Sam. And then the problem solved is, by the end of the day, the Chinese will just also eat the Irish, I guess. Yeah, it's a whole thing, I guess. Oh, right. Speaking of the Chinese, so, we have here Uncle Sam's Farm in Danger, and let me read you this lovely little bit down here. 70 million of people are starving in the northern provinces of China. Okay, all who can do so are making preparations to come to the United States. Okay, fine so far. Look out for the grasshoppers, Uncle Sam. You almost had it. So 70 million people are starving. Those that are able to, because there's plenty of people who are just too poor and weak to make it to the United States, they're just going to die. But those that are going to be able to are going to try to make it to the U.S. to not starve to death. And the response is, look out for the grasshoppers. They're going to come and eat all our food, I guess. Rather than There's 70 million people starving to death. Nice grasshoppers. They're gonna come get us. This one's in the book. Stranger at Our Gate, 1889 or 1899. Unfortunately, this image that I found, it doesn't have the caption underneath it. Immigrant, can I come in? Uncle Sam, I suppose you can. There's no law to keep you out. United States of America, entry, admittance free, walk in. So you got Sabbath desecration, anarchy. What's that on his back? Intemperance. Right. There's a whole temperance thing, which is prohibition. Disease, poverty, yada, yada, yada. Oh, we got another one. This is the U.S. in the hands of the Jew. House, Senate, republicanism, democracy, the gold standard, I guess. So you've got Wall Street, democracy. Over here is the Rothschilds. This was the big, scary Jewish family before Soros came along. And this isn't even like, oh no, they're going to kill us. This is like, oh no, they're going to ruin the economy, I guess. Yeah. And then what Judas ought to do. Anyway, let's talk about something worse. Eugenics. First, let's talk about nativism. Then we'll talk about eugenics. So nativism was this belief that foreigners posed a serious danger to one's native society and culture, which was a response to immigration. Now, I would like to say that there was one time when nativism was correct. And that was the Native Americans when the Europeans showed up. Because we very much did destroy their society and culture. Yeah. And like every other native population that the Europeans waltzed into all over the world. And I don't just mean like I mean anywhere that was just rolled into and conquered, like even like England. The Anglo-Saxons were just wiped out by the Normans, like just all over the place. Anyway, there was this belief that people from Southern Europe, Semitic and Slavic races did not fit into the community of race that created the United States because, you know, the English, French, and Spanish got along so well. Those of you that were here last semester, which is most of you, yeah, remember how well they all got along? Totally fit in. So there were organizations that cropped up, the Immigration Restriction League, bet you can tell what they're about, and the American Protective Association lobbied to restrict immigration, and in the case of the APA, reduce the rights of Catholics. I'll talk about why that is in just a minute. So worse than nativism is the idea of eugenics. This pseudoscience that advocated biological engineering. And again, this is before, like, genetics was really a thing. So this idea was that folks wanted selective breeding of, quote, desirable races to counter the rapid population growth of, quote, useless races. Because Catholics had a lot of kids, is the thing. Catholic families tended to have a lot of kids. Especially the Irish, I should say. But they didn't stop there. It wasn't just like, hey, white people need to have more kids, which is weirdly like a thing still in certain groups. Eugenicists also wanted to institutionalize the unfit and sterilize those they considered mentally impaired, and then license and regulate marriages to promote better breeding. This is dystopian shit, y'all. By the way, if this is sounding familiar to anyone, Um, uh, a certain individual in 1930s Germany didn't think this up on his own. This is where he got it from America. Just to let y'all know, we thought it up. And then he put it into practice. Now, there were some less harsh suggestions than, sterilizing the brown people. So some people suggested assimilation rather than, genocide. So, hey, we should assimilate the immigrants. Education, adoption of American rituals and holidays. 1892, American schools adopted the Pledge of Allegiance. Extolling American virtues like liberty and justice for all. The one nation under God thing didn't happen until the 1950s when we were in the Cold War because the USSR was specifically like a non-Christian nation, so we wanted to be the opposite, so we were specifically a Christian nation, by the way. Still, though, many older immigrants never really got the hang of learning English, though many of them did try, because it's hard to learn another language, especially when you're an adult. The best time to learn another language is when you're growing up, and your brain is still, forming, and you're able to learn more stuff. Okay, so let's look at some of these totally normal images I'm about to show you guys. Here we have not wanted, Rome, rum, and red. So we don't want Catholics, we don't want, I'd say Irish, but that would kind of go with Catholics. I feel like that's German. And then the red, of course, is communists. So here we have Mafia in New Orleans, anarchists in Chicago, socialists in New York. You've got all these various people. Let's see. Starting down here. German socialist, Italian brigand. Some dude with a monkey. Like he doesn't even have a label. He's just some dude with a monkey. Which, I'd be afraid of a dude with a monkey. Monkeys are dangerous. English convict. Even the English are thrown in here. Italian vagabond. Which, what's a vagabond gonna do? They just don't have a home. Leave them alone. Russian anarchist. It's nice that they've got these labels. Over here, though, Irish pauper. That just means he's poor. Oh, I'm sorry. Dude's coming over here for a better life? Yeah, okay, let's throw him in here with, literal bomb-throwing anarchists. Yeah, same thing. Here we have a really good image from Puck. So, Puck's always got good stuff for us. So, here we have an immigrant coming over. He's still on the gangplank coming off the ship. And you've got these businessmen turning him away, like one guy's even holding his nose. Or no, he's not holding his nose, he's looking through his glasses. I thought he was holding his nose. Anyway, they're waving him off, telling him to go back. And then their shadows here are their forefathers, their ancestors. Probably, maybe not their fathers, but like their grandfathers or their great-grandfathers, who were themselves immigrants. Because, as I told my other class, unless you're 100% Native American, you didn't come from this country. You're the child of someone who came from overseas, one way or another. And what's amusing, and I'm not going to get too much into this because this is a history class, is you see that a lot today. Like the most virulent anti-immigrant voices are I'm just going to say, 2 generations removed from being an immigrant. Say their grandfather was an immigrant and actually changed their name to sound more American. But, I'm just throwing a random one out there. and also like married a lot of Eastern European immigrants. But anyway, yeah. Okay, this is the thing about Catholics. Why they're always picking on Catholics in these earlier things. So, if you take my European course, you would know more about this. But for American history, in the past, and by the past I mean like all of European history, there's been this back and forth with whether Catholics should be beholden to, and by Catholics I mean like church leaders, really, like the bishops and priests and stuff, should be beholden to the Pope or like the king, medieval era stuff. And there are laws being passed by like the king, and then the Pope gets more power, and it's a lot of back and forth. So there's a lot of distrust of like the church, and then that goes on to just like regular Catholic people. So when it comes over here to America, after the Protestant Reformation, there's this belief that if the Catholics get into power, then they will follow the Pope's direction, for goodness sake, rather than the people's direction. So if, say, for example, John F. Kennedy, who was Catholic, when he was running, this was still a thing. People were still like, oh, if he becomes president, then the Pope's going to control the country. And I don't know who the Pope was at the time, but the Pope was like, I don't care about what you guys do. I'm busy over here. Yeah, the Pope hasn't been like a world player in at least a century. So like, yeah. So this was the thing though. When we talk about like anti-Catholic stuff, this is why. There's this belief that if the Catholics get in power, then it's actually the Pope that's in power, and the Pope is like a foreign power, and yada yada yada. So that's what that's about. Just so y'all know. My history professor, who is Irish, actually has that in his office, because that was all over the place back in the day. Yeah, they needed help, but if you're Irish, don't bother, because we don't want any dirty Irish in here. Here's another good one. And as I told my class last Thursday, this woman could well be my grandmother, because she was and still is a racist old bat. Yeah, she very much would point at the signs. Like, if you do you not see both of the signs? I will point at it for you. So here is a eugenics thing. Some people are born to be a burden on the rest. This light flashes every 15 seconds. Every 15 seconds, $100 of your money goes to the care of persons with bad heredity, such as the insane, feeble-minded criminals, and other defectives. This light flashes every 16 seconds. Every 16 seconds, a person is born in the United States. That is it's way more now. It's probably like every 2. And then over here, this light flashes every 7.5 minutes. Every 7.5 minutes, a high-grade person is born in the United States. Will. Yeah, real good there, guys. I guess. And will have the ability to do creative work and be fit for leadership. About 4% of all Americans will come within this class. So, like, there's this... Well, let me just go to the next one. Registering human pedigrees. How Kansas develops fitter families. A remarkable experiment in eugenics. So, basically, you bring your family in to these creepy old women, and they examine your family for, like, proper eugenic traits, which, again, if you don't know what that is, Um, Here's some. What your skull looks like. What your face looks like. Is your skull shaped weird? You're probably a criminal. Your skull shaped a different weird way? You're probably insane. It's really about the skin color, guys. It's always about the skin color. But yeah. Oh, also, I got some other fun ones. Her sterilization would have cost $150. So, thanks to Ada Duke not being sterilized in 1740, 92% of her descendants, 64 were mentally diseased. Okay. 174 were sex perverts. Okay. 196 were illegitimates, which just means born out of wedlock. All right. 142 were paupers. They're poor. All right. Whose fault's that? And 77 were criminals and murderers. All right. Oh, and I also love this one. This is like the alternate universe split. So, Martin Kallikak. I hate this man. All right. So here in the dark universe, he dallied with a feeble-minded tavern girl. She bore a son known as Old Horror. Maybe they shouldn't have named him Old Horror. Who had 10 children. From Old Horror's 10 children came hundreds of the lowest types of human beings. All right. Meanwhile, in the light universe, he married a worthy Quakeress. She bore 7 upright, worthy children. From the 7 worthy children came hundreds of the highest types of human beings. So you see, this is a really basic, like, eugenics idea of heredity. Also, I love, like, the two-face thing they've got going on here. Okay, great. Let's do the assimilation dilemma, and then we will be where my other class is. That'll be great. Okay. Not all immigrants could become fully assimilated, but they were also not the same people they were when they left their homeland. So the writer Israel Zangwill, English-American Jew, portrayed the hope of assimilation in the play The Melting Pot. So this is where the idea of the melting pot came from. In fact, I had a student, she was in my European class, mention the melting pot idea. This was the ideal of assimilation. This was portrayed in cartoons, business corporation ceremonies, and lessons in school classrooms. I mean, we've all heard the melting pot term, at least. We may have never heard Israel Zangwill, but we've heard melting pot. But for the most part, it was really just an ideal. Immigrants never really lost their cultural, social, and political identities that they brought with them because, I mean, they're still people. And even if they did become fully assimilated, even if they came over and just became like the perfect American, they adopted like all the perfect everything, the anti-immigrant sentiment of the native-born Americans would still treat them as something other. And again, like, what is American? Like, you've got people here, and then you go up to, like, well, to use the Super Bowl as an example, go up to Philly, they talk weird. Or you go to New Jersey, or go to New York, or when I was up in Rhode Island, like, America is very regional. And, I mean, like, and I'll visit my friend in Wisconsin, like, we're all very different because of, in part, the various groups of immigrants that came over and, like, well, I'll go ahead and go to this next one, actually. Socialist W.E.B. Du Bois summed this up in his The Souls of Black Folk, where he described the two-ness of the blacks in America, their identity of their African heritage and past as slaves, and as free citizens. He described this as double consciousness, which could also apply to immigrants. So the book mentions this as like a vegetable soup, where you've got the chunks of their past identity and then the soup of partial assimilation with everything else, rather than a melting pot. Individuals in a collective broth, rather than coming together to be the same. So, was just what I was getting to, where you've got regions of America that are, I mean, again, when I went up to Wisconsin, like I went through Pennsylvania and the Midwest, and there were people speaking German. There were Amish, because there was such a massive like German population in that region. They just kept speaking German, and that's fine. They're American. They've lived there for 100 to 200 years. And the reason we have so many different cultures and so many different types of people is because we've had so many different cultures and types of people that have moved to America and stayed in regions or moved around. So here's Israel Zangwill. America is God's crucible, the great melting pot, where all races of Europe are melting and reforming. The real American has not yet arrived. He's only the crucible. I tell you, he is the fusion of all races. Which would imply that we would be moving around, but we're not. Well, a lot of people do move around, but like, as long as we stay in the same place, we're going to maintain regional differences, which is fine also. Here is W.B. Du Bois, and this is such a good quote. It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, the sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a word I probably can't say. Two words, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. He is such a great writer, and we will talk more about him next chapter. I love this man. I mean, just for example, I am from Florence. I'm from South Carolina. I've lived here my entire life. I spent 4 months in Ireland. My accent didn't go away, but it weakened significantly. And then I came back, and it came right back. I was in Rhode Island for 2 years doing my grad school, and my accent weakened. And then my mother and my aunt came up to visit I had some kind of like honors society thing to do. And in the 15-minute drive from the airport back to my apartment, I said y'all 7 times. I hadn't said it for the year and a half I had been up there, because I had just been around people that don't say y'all. We do assimilate a little bit to the people we're around. That's just how we are as humans. But we always keep some of who we are. That's just how it is. Anyway, yeah, we'll keep going on Wednesday. Just as a reminder, next Wednesday is the paper. I'll see y'all on Wednesday. So yeah, have a good day.